session is on disparities in traffic issues. I think many of you who probably live around here know about the awful traffic we have. It's among the worst in the country. And we've got a little write-up of our session here in the program booklet. But basically what we're going to be talking about is some of the air pollution issues that result from mostly the traffic from diesel buses and trucks and certain point sources, industrial pollutant sources, incinerators, coal-powered power plants, and how all of this impacts certain populations disproportionately. And so our speakers today are going to address sort of their role and their involvement in dealing with environmental justice issues in this realm in Southwest DC, in the Ivy City neighborhood, and in Maryland and Baltimore. So I think it's going to be an interesting session. We've got a video in addition to a couple of PowerPoints, so I think you'll enjoy our time. Each speaker is going to have about 15 minutes to do their presentation, and then that should leave us some time for questions at the end of the presentation. So working on get all this stuff loaded up. So I think what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about our speakers while they're doing this, so we don't have to wait. Our first speaker is Kyle Anderson. He's here on the far end of the table here. Kyle is with he's the president of the Southwest Neighborhood Center in Southwest DC. It's a civic association. He's also a board member of two other Southwest organizations, Southwest Art Fest and Fiber Island Cooperative Homes. In addition to other coordinating roles, he leads the Southwest DC Environmental Justice Group. He'll be our first speaker. Second speaker is Kelly. I will tell you a little bit about her. Unfortunately, I don't know this, so I can speak directly. Here we go. She's an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project, which is here in DC. She has worked on a number of different pollution problems in Maryland, concentrating on those in South Baltimore. Prior to joining the Environmental Integrity Project, she spent 3 years working at a small public interest law firm in upstate New York, focusing on land use and environmental matters. Leah graduated from Boston College Law School in 2007 with a certificate in land use and environmental law. During law school, she worked as an intern with Alternatives for Community and the Environment, as a summer law clerk with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and as a student attorney with the Boston College Legal Assistance Bureau. Third speaker is Teresa Maruzzi. Yes, indeed. She's with Empower DC. She's their executive director, a citywide grassroots organizing group whose mission is to enhance, improve, and promote the self-advocacy of low and moderate-income DC residents in order to bring about sustainable improvements in their quality of life. Empower DC's grassroots campaigns address the critical issues of affordable housing, affordable child care, improving public education, and saving public property. Empower DC is providing support to community action against air pollution in the Ivy City neighborhood, which she'll be speaking to directly about today. And the group also provides free trainings throughout its Environmental Circle series. It trains residents in audio and video production through its grassroots media project. She'll be showing a video today as a part of that work. And our fourth speaker is Amir. Sakura.
That's right.
Okay. And he is at the Maryland Institute of Applied Environmental Health, Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. Is that part of the University of Maryland?
Yes, School of Public Health.
Yeah, Public Health. Okay. He got his PhD in Environmental Health Sciences from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He joined a growing number of faculty at the University of Maryland. CP, is that? Okay. You can tell I'm from the other side of the river. environment. His primary interests lie in the area of exposure assessment, environmental epidemiology. He's interested in utilizing personal air measurements as well as urinary and serum biomarkers to understand the risk of diseases associated with exposure to various air pollutants. He works on a wide range of topics, including inner city environment, asthma, and impact of traffic on community health. So, with that said, I think we're ready to go with the PowerPoint. So, Kyle, why don't you get us started?
Well, thanks for attending. My name is Dennis Kayla Anderson. Just curious, how many people are from within the Beltway in the DC area? Just show of hands. And the rest of Maryland? So, we can split half and half. Oh, and one from Virginia. Okay. Well, I was asked to discuss environmental justice efforts in Southwest DC. I'll first introduce a geographic context, and then provide an overview of our recent initiatives and the groups involved, and then thirdly, briefly talk about the issues themselves. So, some background. We're talking about the Southwest quadrant of DC, which is located at the confluence of the Anacostia and Potomac rivers. It has land uses. The northern part of Southwest, but just below the mall, is a federal enclave, a federal employment enclave known as the Southwest Federal Center. The south of that, south of the highway actually, is more or less a residential community. And then the southern tip of Southwest, well, if you don't include the park, is an industrial area. So several years ago, there's always been a long-standing concern about environmental issues in Southwest. But several years ago, a handful of residents developed a relationship with the Georgetown Lombardi Cancer Center's Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities. Based on concerns raised by the residents, the Lombardi Center contacted the Georgetown University Law Center's Community Justice Project to recommend some legal and policy solutions to environmental health issues in Southwest. If you're not familiar with it, the Community Justice Project is Georgetown's effort to give students an opportunity to represent clients and learn a wide range of strategies, including advocacy, policy drafting, and community organizing. So from the fall of 2011 to the spring of 2012, this group held town halls, met with the DC Department of Environment, organized a bus item petition, and developed some other resources for Southwest residents. In an effort to complement and carry on the students' work, we formed the Southwest Environmental Justice Group. There was an initial burst of what I'll call active participation when the students got involved in the area, but due to various factors, it now more or less comprises a small group of leaders that serve as a coordinating committee. We maintain a wider distribution network where we post meeting notes, announcements, and other miscellaneous departmental information. And it's been successful, I would say, from a coordination standpoint, but we really can only point to a few direct accomplishments of note because the core members are more involved in other focal areas, whether it's cancer support, leader, a national environmental justice leader, an advisory neighborhood commissioner, which is a semi-official position, and myself as president of the Civic Association. But perhaps most our notable accomplishments are our efforts to regularly publish stories in the community newspaper. So for some more context on what's going on in Southwest, this was a map that was produced by the Georgetown Law students. It illustrates that there's a number of public housing properties in blue. There's a number of hazards in yellow and red. Many of them are clustered in the area known as Buzzard Point, which is the southern tip of Southwest, which is right next to what was then Fort Leslie McNair military base. It's now part of Fort Myer. And then in addition to that, I'll just point out that there's a number of piers along the southwest waterfront that are a point of disembarkation for entertainment and some sightseeing cruise boats. Which brings me to the first issue, that being bus idling, air pollution. Southwest is kind of the front and the back door to DC. Front door in that it is the principal entryway for a lot of visitors coming to downtown, the mall, and the cruise boats. And at the same time, a lot of commuter buses coming in through Southwest to pick up employees downtown and shuttle them out to more generally where they live in the suburbs. At least that's focused on the commuter buses. And so, but as a consequence of the fact that there's a relatively large amount of open space in Southwest, and whether public space or underutilized land is probably appropriate term. The tour buses, whether through policy or just individual decisions, tend to congregate in Southwest. And actually, I pulled up one of the recent transportation plans that the city put together and highlights a number of existing and proposed parking lots for buses. To kind of respond to this, we've developed some citizen reporting and enforcement mechanisms. We've done some political advocacy, and we're trying to work with the city towards a long-term solution because we recognize that tour buses are here to stay, and it's best to figure out how to best manage that. So another important issue is air pollution in Southwest. A large PEPCO power plant has long anchored the southern tip of Southwest, again, what it's called Buzzard Point, on the top right. It's being decommissioned this year, but of course there's many concerns with how that process will occur, given that the property will inevitably eventually redevelop. We also have as part of the $2 billion plan to redevelop the Southwest waterfront, the developer is proposing a cogeneration plant, which the plant itself would actually just be that end of one building. It would burn, more than likely burn natural gas. It's actually been proposed as an amenity to the project, but obviously there's some concerns with the environmental impacts of it. And the third power plant that I'll note is the Capitol Power Plant, which sits right next to Southwest and the Capitol, of course. There is a December 17th hearing, DC Council hearing, where they're proposing to, in addition to use it for heating purposes, use it for electricity purposes, and at the same time convert from coal to natural gas. So there's some fairly important changes that would essentially increase the generating capacity of that plant. And then the fourth plant that I'll just note here is the federal government central utility plant, which I shouldn't say power, but it heats the Federal Employment Center in Southwest. The next issue is soil pollution. There are a number of confirmed and anticipated contamination sources in Southwest, a bunch of former gas stations, there's an existing Department of Motor Vehicle inspection station, and a number of industrial sites again in the Buzzard Point area of Southwest, and that's kind of the photomontage here, some scrap yards and what else. So it's a concern obviously because of the tremendous redevelopment activity that maybe you all don't know, but there's a tremendous amount of redevelopment activity occurring in Southwest. It's central city area, but for various reasons it hasn't been as developed as the area north of the mall. So as this activity happens, we want to make sure that the remediation adequately occurs, and there's also some of our own efforts to better utilize our public spaces by integrating some things like a community garden and a dog park. We've also been putting some emphasis on the waste stream. There are some of our residents work with the city to institute a recycling program at public housing projects in DC. So just a photo there of one of the trash bins. And secondly, the GSA utility plant that I just mentioned is proposing to, there's a plan for the area to essentially create an eco-district for this portion of the Southwest Federal Center. And as part of that, the plan proposes to switch the GSA plant from burning natural gas to solid waste. There's concern about some of the environmental impacts of having an incineration plant. And then thirdly, the city environmental plan is proposing to develop an incineration plant, add an incineration plant in DC that would be used by the city and Prince George's County. One of the sites is proposed in the Southwest. So again, we're trying to identify the scope of that and how that might play out. And just a few more minor miscellaneous issues that we're working on is a church that is adding a daycare. To support the daycare, they built a parking lot. Unfortunately, the parking lot is made of road tailings, obviously, asphalt, geoasphalt. And so it's some concerns about the environmental effect of that, and in addition to the fact that it wasn't built with any drainage standards, and the city has a fairly stringent drainage standards, so we're trying to work with the city, even though the permitting office approved it, but the Department of Environment did not. So it's just kind of these odd anomalies in how government works in DC. And then secondly, there's a Western Nile outbreak. It happened to be near a duck pond. We call it Southwest Duck Pond. It's not being maintained well by the city. It's relatively expensive on a park basis. So the city doesn't like to put a lot of money into it to get a properly functioning filter system. Consequently, there's a lot of legal matter. And anyway, so that's enough on that for now, I guess. Unless you have questions. The only third issue that I'll note is there is a general concern about pure air quality of public housing projects. Partly it's just a factor of poor knowledge base among the population in that area, and also more than likely inadequate maintenance standards. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to answer any more questions or delve into the issues that I've been mentioned. Thank you.
We probably can take a question or two if people have anything right away. We can talk more about it later. Burning questions? I'll ask one,
Okay.
if I could. And that is, have you worked at all on any brownfield sites in the city?
No.
No? It hasn't
No,
been-
I'm actually really new into this. I just got into this through my work as a association here. We obviously have a lot of brownfield issues in Southwest, but it's really difficult to get some leverage with the city. One example is of the brownfield is the Washington Navy Yard, which emit a lot of toxins into the Anacostia River. They've now settled on the river bottom, and now that there is, we should just leave them there. So it's kind of working with those sorts of issues, like we know more or less the brownfield around the power plant, but until there's some development plan, it's really, we can't justify putting more time into making sure that the standards are in place for whenever that does redevelop. So
That's definitely on your radar.
yeah.
I wonder if you could just describe a little bit about the demographics of the population in Southwest. And you mentioned there's some public housing, but is there military housing? I think there's some.
No, there's a Marine barrack just across South Capitol Street in near Southeast. That is some barracks for the Marine Corps, but the military base in Southwest, at least the new Southwest portion they're focusing on, is a more or less central administrative unit. So it's a lot of ceremonial and there's a limited number of single-family houses for the officer corps, but it's not of any consequence. Most of the military housing in the vicinity is on the Bowling Air Force Base.
Aren't there some upscale apartment buildings and condominiums in Southwest too?
Yeah, outside of the military housing, Southwest is one of the most diverse income communities in the city. There's a fairly large amount of upper-income housing. It tends to be congregated on the western and northern sections of the residential area, and then as you get further south and east, it becomes lower-income housing all the way. Obviously, we have both public housing projects, section 8, but subsidized properties, both public and rental. I would say it's a pretty more or less median income. Generally speaking, it's traditionally been one of the most affordable areas in the city, but obviously that's not changing with public development.
What is the level of interest behind developing waste and energy facilities? In other words, is there some leverage that we have in that area?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but with respect to the GSA, essentially utility heating plant, it's the theory behind that is we want to make it sustainable. We don't want to have any external issues, and so if we don't send the waste to landfill and burn it on site, we won't have the external mitigating impacts. And so the theory is again just to use it in the facility. It's a long-term plan, so it's unclear if that would happen. You know, it's a question, of course, is it better to burn natural gas or, you know, with all the cost of the extraction process, or to do an incineration or something else. So, you know, it's long term. And the city's, you know, incineration plans are somewhat new, actually. And we tried to look online for any documentation. There really isn't any, but there was a recent council hearing that somewhat delved into the matter. As I understand it, there's a company, I believe, based in Churches County, that would like to see incineration plants occur. And so Churches has been working with, initially they were trying to work with Frederick County and Carroll County on an incineration plant, but now it seems like they've circled back to work with the city on it.
I'm familiar with that situation. There's a lot of pushback because it would discourage recycling.
All right, I think we need to move on. Thanks, Kyle. Next speaker will be Leah Kelly from the Environmental Integrity Project.
All right, this is some of my slides have been replaced by blank slides, which I hope is not the case.
Well, as Mr. Lister said, I'm Leah Kelly. I'm an attorney with the Environmental Integrity Project, and we're a DC-based organization. We do work throughout the United States. We have a program in Maryland where we get to actually have a latitude to work on sort of sources of pollution throughout Maryland. But we have developed a focus in our Maryland work on South Baltimore, specifically because as we were doing the statewide work, we started noticing that a lot of the sources that we were working on were all in one area, and wanted to have a chance to focus on that. So that's what I'm going to address today. And I also just wanted to mention that in the audience we have our community organizer who works with us as well in this area and with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and they've been a really invaluable partner in that work. So this is just to give you a sense of the region that I'm talking about. This is Baltimore, and the areas, the neighborhoods are called Curtis Bay and Brooklyn, and this isn't all of South Baltimore. There's actually South Baltimore extends a little bit up here, and there are a lot of environmental justice issues throughout Baltimore. As I said, we ended up concentrating on just these neighborhoods because of our perception that a lot of the sources that we've just been working on anyway in Maryland were in that neighborhood. But there's also a community called Cherry Hill immediately to the north, right around here, that has recently told us that they've been experiencing a lot of problems with air pollution as well. And we've heard a lot about other environmental justice problems with air pollution throughout Baltimore City. So we may be able to expand the scope of this at some point. Certainly hope to, in order to address other environmental justice issues in Baltimore. But concentrating on these neighborhoods, this is a map showing sort of the different parts of the neighborhood. And the Fairfield area and Hawkins Point to the south are both entirely industrial areas, as is the area called the Curtis Bay Industrial Area. So the two neighborhoods are Brooklyn and Curtis Bay, shown in light pink and orange. And in addition to being industrial areas, they're also, you can't see it, but they're flanked to the north by 895, which is a major highway, and to the south by 695. And the combination of that plus the high level of industrialization of the area has resulted in a lot of industrial truck traffic going through the residential neighborhoods, and we've spoken to residents out there, and
that's one of the primary things that's been brought to our attention. In addition to the problems with the industries, is the high level of truck traffic, not only going near the neighborhoods, but actually going through the residential parts of the neighborhoods. And the community association there has been trying to get it rerouted away from the residential neighborhoods for quite some time. So this is, I'm going to start with just how we got interested in this, and this is a map of all of the major sources of air pollution and this is just in the one zip code 21226, which is the Curtis Bay zip code. It extends down a little bit into Anne Arundel County, which is south of Baltimore City. And major sources of air pollution, this just means under the Clean Air Act, these are classified as major sources of air pollution. They're not minor sources, and it's, if I recall correctly, the threshold is over 100 tons per year for certain pollutants, and then for other pollutants it's over 25 tons per year. And just to give you a sense of, there are two coal-fired power plants. There's a medical waste incinerator, several petroleum and chemical tank farms, and then a couple of chemical manufacturing companies as well. And there's also a coal pier that's not shown.
Is that Wagner's Point?
No, this is Wagner's Point is actually part of Fairfield. That's the Fairfield Peninsula is right up there, and Wagner's Point is the southern part. Yes, 210. That's what it was. Yeah. And then this down here is called Hawkins Point. And this is another just set of information about how we got interested in it. This is EPA has a database called the Toxic Release Inventory, and we took a look when we first started getting started on this project at the information from this database, and this is the rankings for TRI keeps emissions of toxic air pollutants from stationary sources. So it doesn't toxic air pollutants is only one set of the kinds of air pollutants. It doesn't include criteria pollutants, which are the things that are emitted in really, really large quantities from things like power plants. So this is toxic air pollutants, and it's also from stationary sources, so it doesn't include mobile sources. But you can see in 2007 and 2008, this was the #1 zip code in the country for releases of toxic air pollutants from stationary sources, so from facilities. And then in 2009, it dropped down to 2, and then 2010 and 2011, it's been 75 and 73 out of 8,949 zip codes. And part of the reason that it's dropped, you can see when you look at the pounds of pollutants, it's actually gone down significantly. And part of the reason for that has been that one of the coal-fired power plants in the area put on a scrubber, and it's made a big difference, but it's still fairly high.
Which one?
Rainy Shores. And this is, I think, the last set of information that sort of got us concerned. The Baltimore City Health Department has a wonderful program where they issue city neighborhood health profiles, and so you have community-specific health information for a number of different kinds of diseases. Unfortunately, we didn't have asthma, but we had these figures for heart disease, lung cancer, and chronic lower respiratory disease. And so our organization was able to, it doesn't have the source information isn't sure, but we were able to compare the information that we got from the Baltimore City neighborhood health profiles with state, national, and citywide rates for these diseases. And as you can see, and these are all diseases that have been linked in scientific literature with, there's some correlation with exposure to air pollution. Obviously, it's not always a direct correlation, and multiple things can affect these outcomes. But you can see heart disease is, for these neighborhoods, is over twice the state and national rates, and the lung cancer and chronic lower respiratory disease are also significantly higher than the state and national rates, and also a little bit higher than the city rates. And asthma is known as a very big problem in Baltimore City, and we couldn't get neighborhood-specific information on asthma, but these are figures, the most recent figures that we had from the Maryland Asthma Control Program. We issued a report on this earlier this past year. These are the most recent figures that we had. But asthma-related hospitals are more than double the Maryland rate in 2009, and mortality rate was more than double the Maryland rate when you look at the 2005-2009 data set. And lastly, this is the demographic information. This is based on 2010 census data, and this is taking a look at the economic data. The median household income of the neighborhood is pretty similar to Baltimore City, but it's about half of what it is in Maryland generally, and significantly lower than what it is in the United States. The percent of families living below the poverty line is significantly higher than both the city rate and state and national rates. And the percent unemployed was about even with the city, but higher than state and national rates. So it's a low-income community, and it is, and that's also part of what made us interested in it as an EJ community. So what we did we issued a report earlier this year, and what we were really interested in looking at in this community was air quality. And one of the primary challenges in looking at air quality in a specific neighborhood is the lack of data that's specific to that community, just because air pollutants travel. And so we started to take a look at the monitors, the stationary monitors that measure concentrations of air pollution in Baltimore, and we didn't have one in this neighborhood. There was one there up until 2008, but it was taken down, and there has not been one there since. The one that was taken down in 2008 measured fine particulate matter, which is a pollutant that contributes to heart disease as well as respiratory effects. So we did take a look at EPA models, and I'll discuss that in a second. They do have significant limitations. So this shows the air quality monitors that existed in 2008 in Baltimore City. And this one is the FMC Fairfield one, which is at the bottom. That was in the community, but that was taken down in 2008. It was located at a chemical company that closed. So it was taken down when the chemical company closed and just was not replaced. And the nearest monitor is the one sort of in the middle on the right. It's this BCFD truck company, and that's it's about 4 miles away from, a little bit over 4 miles away from the community. It's near the Fairfield monitor. And this is the only ozone monitor in Baltimore City. It's a little bit over, it's about 7 miles away from the community. So we did look at the data from these monitors, but they're not all that close. So this is, when we took a look at the most recent data that we had for fine particulate matter, again, we only had it up until part of 2008, so in order to have a complete year's worth of data, we had 2007. And you can see it's going down, and it was below the EPA air quality standard before the air quality monitor was taken down. It's probably gone down since then, but I should just note that EPA's recent proposed new standard for PM2.5 is lower than that. It's between 12 and 13 micrograms per meters cubed, and they're taking comment on a possible standard of 11. And this is ozone, and this is 2011, keeping this about 7 miles away. And we did actually look at that in order to try to make it sort of comparable to EPA's standard. We looked at the 4th highest reading per year, and this is an 8-hour ozone concentration. And you can see it was actually going up the last couple of years. We haven't looked at more recent data than this, but it was a little bit concerning that it was going up recently. So we also wanted to try to get a better sense of data specific to this neighborhood. We took a look at a model that EPA has called the National Air Toxics Assessment. And this allows us to get information about concentrations of toxic air pollutants, again, not criteria pollutants, not things like fine particulate matter. So it does give us census tract level data, but it has some very significant limitations. Only toxic air pollutants are considered. The most recent model is based on 2005 emissions information from the National Emissions Inventory. And it's difficult to compare among census tracts in different states because the emissions are reported differently depending on which state you're in. But it does allow a breakdown of air quality concentrations by pollutant and by source category, which is valuable. And it also allows an evaluation of cancer risk and respiratory risk that is not cancer, so not lung cancer. And when we took a look at there are 4 census tracts in this neighborhood, and 3 of them are residential, 1 of them is entirely industrial. When we looked at cancer risk, again, this is based on 2005 emissions information, but for non-cancer respiratory risk, all of the census tracts were between the 87th and the 92nd percentile. And and all the cancer risk was between the 73rd and 91st percentile in the state. This is and in terms of where the health risks are coming, we broke it down by a lot of different factors, but I've just included a couple here. And this is without diesel PM figured in. We actually added that using a cancer potency value that we found from the California EPA. But this is, so you can see the primary pollutants that are causing the cancer risk are formaldehyde and benzene. But when you add in diesel PM, you've got to be kidding me. That was my best slide. It was almost the whole thing was diesel PM. It was 82%. Okay, so this is non-cancer respiratory risk. It's mostly acrylic. Let me pull to wrap it up. So, all right, this is at the point at which the software has shorted out. But my last slide was next steps, and the next steps we're taking, we're actually going to start a portable monitoring project in order to get air quality, in order to get local air quality information, because we think it's very important. So that's something we're about to start. We're also working with the Maryland Department of the Environment to do a diesel reduction project, which is going to be, I think, really valuable. We've also been working with the community to try to empower people to address some of the problems in this neighborhood, including this one, but not limited to this one. Okay.
Thank you. Take one question. Okay.
Noticing the heart disease was even more elevated over the rest of the area than the 2 lung diseases were.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you've looked at all at what role suppression of physical activity and lack of access to healthy food have with that, because like the heart kind of stood out from the lungs.
Yeah.
And obviously the trucks, not only do they put pollutants into the air, the pollutants keep people from going outside and exercising, and the trucks themselves, the danger of getting hit by them, really damages the walkability and access to the community.
Yeah, it all compounds. It all compounds the problem. And one of the things I can say about that is that this is also the biggest food desert in Baltimore City. The Baltimore City Health Profiles ranked each neighborhood in the city by access to a grocery store, by proximity to a grocery store. This is dead last.
I'd like to make one comment, though, and that is that one of the sources is the Wagner coal-fired power plants, and the Sierra Club is working to close that down. Go ahead and mention that.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next speaker is Marisa Nusa, who's going to talk about the Ivy City neighborhood.
Hello, how's everybody? Has anybody heard of Empower DC before?
Yes.
A couple people? Who lives in the District of Columbia? A couple people, okay. Has anybody heard of Ivy City? Okay, how did you hear about it?
Read about it in the
Okay, got some recent press. Did anybody see the TV news coverage Monday? Okay, well, let me see if I can pull up my little video as an introduction. This is about 5 minutes long. I'm a little worried about the sound. Let's see. And if I show you this, then I don't have to talk as much. It'll be more exciting. Let's see. Does anybody know?
Just click on the.
You want to bring it to full screen?
Yeah, I think the right pen's made it worse. This computer is not mine, and it's a little harder to manipulate.
I don't believe the sound is hooked up, but you can play it and see if it's loud enough to hear.
See how loud this thing is.
Right click on it. Well, we can see it.
How do I make it
My
full
name is
screen?
Andrea Swanson, and I am a third-generation Ivy City resident. My mother was a preschool at the Alexandria Middle School,
Thank you.
which was the heart of our community
You hear a little?
until the city closed it in 1972. Ever since, our community has advocated that Cornell be reopened to provide recreation and job training to uplift our residents.
Hello, my name is Charles and I am 11 years old and I go to Wheat. I live in Ivy City. And what I want to see in the community of Ivy City is a basketball court, a football field, and a pool. Also a playground with lots more things on it for my little siblings. When I see Cornell School, I think it could be a recreational center for the kids around Ivy City so they don't hang in the streets and play basketball on broken courts. I would like to see things change quick so my little brother won't grow up without things to play on. And I think the adults need some job training help for them to get better jobs. When can you help Ivy City? Can you help us soon before little kids get older without anything? Thank you.
Ivy City youth who testified about Cornell earlier this year. After decades of neglect, we started to see some positive changes. 58 families are moving into new, affordable homes being completed by NANA, Mikasa, and DC Habitat for Humanity. And after years of advocacy, DC's comprehensive plan acknowledges our vision for job training
Does anybody know who that last speaker was? That is Romaine Thomas, who is the mother of former Ward 5 Councilman Harry Thomas Jr. and the widow of previous Ward 5 Councilman Harry Thomas Sr. She attended Carmel School as a child. She grew up actually in Ivy City and also taught there later in life. But Empower DC is a citywide community organizing group. Our mission is to enhance, improve, and promote the self-advocacy of low and moderate income DC residents. We really focus on developing the confident self-advocacy of people directly impacted by issues like affordable housing, child care, education, and then building political power by bringing groups of people together and organizing, developing an action plan, and carrying it out. Ivy City really holds a very special place in my heart because I came up through the environmental movement and moved. I grew up in Maryland, but I moved into the district right after college in 2000 to work as an organizer for an environmental group. But I became so inspired by the soul of the city and through really trying to investigate the history of DC and what was going on, I became introduced to Ivy City. And at that time in 2001, started working with the Civic Association president, who is deceased now, but and then ended up joining forces with some of the alumni and the residents to get the Carmel School, designated historic in 2002. Through this process, basically, first of all, Ivy City was the inspiration for the creation of Empower DC. The concept of the organization came about during that time, 2001, 2002, and we founded Empower DC at the end of 2003. Also, Carmel School was the inspiration for the creation of a campaign that was called the People's Property Campaign that we ran for about 5 years that sought to address the issue of the use of public property and community having a voice in what happens to it. When it's no longer a school, then it still should be maintained as a public asset and used for other community needs. Basically what you see here is Ivy City is a very historic African American community. It was founded in 1872 at a time that it was isolated and it was not part of, DC went up to basically Florida Avenue, the L'Enfant Plan. This was in the middle of the woods, surrounded by farms, and it was settled by African Americans shortly after emancipation around the B&O Railroad and some other manufacturing centers in that area. It actually was there was a national fairgrounds there originally in the 1800s and a racetrack, a horse racing track, where a lot of African Americans were both jockeys and also tended to the horses there. So I grew up around that, and it was always a very civically engaged community. In 1911, they founded their civic association, and they fought for the development of the Alexander Carmel School as a institution of learning for African American children in Ivy City and Trinidad. So the school was built in 1911 and named. Does anybody know who Carmel was? Nobody. He was an abolitionist who worked alongside Frederick Douglass. He was an educator who actually at one point taught at Howard University. He was a clergyman who's essentially credited with desegregating the Episcopal Church. And he founded the first African-American think tank, the American Negro Academy. Of its time, it was writing books about the plight of African-Americans. He was a really prolific, important figure who passed, I believe it was like 1898, and the school was named for him in 1911, so not long after that. And again, it was significant that the school building was named for an abolitionist, and somebody who was, his whole purpose in life was the uplift of African Americans, particularly lower income African Americans. So long story short, this is a neighborhood that has always been civically engaged, but of course because it was a low moderate income neighborhood, because it was an African American neighborhood, it had no political allies, it was constantly having to fight for basic things like getting paved roads and street lights and improvements to the school. Also was having to fight off unwanted things, and one of the big things that was a devastating blow was that it was in the path of a proposed freeway in the 50s. And some of you may know about the transportation battles that took place during that time, and that particular leg of the freeway was averted. However, that caused a lot of people that were long-standing people in the community to kind of fear that this neighborhood wasn't going to be here anymore. People left, And then, of course, a number of things happened that contributed to the blight and decay of the neighborhood. One of the most significant ones being the closure of the Alexander Crummell School, which was the heart of the neighborhood, and it was closed around 1972. And the city let it sit and deteriorate ever since, basically. The community has been extremely vocal about its civic heart being restored. However, again, it's a small neighborhood. The median income now is about $19,000. It's a very low-income neighborhood, and if you go there, and I've now been working over there for 11 years, and you know, the housing that we mentioned in the film, when we first found out that the city had compiled ownership over all these vacant lots in the neighborhood, they didn't tell anybody what was going on. And then, you know, I had started doing a history project to document the history of Ivy City, and there's a lot of this stuff on YouTube and other places online you can look for. And stumbled upon a meeting where literally there was one resident in the room, and the Office of Planning was saying, there's two options on the table for Ivy City. One is to remove everybody and make it a commercial area. The other is to make it a mixed income neighborhood. And of course, with what we see in DC, we knew either meant displacement, right? Rising housing costs and displacing residents, or eminent domain and displacing residents. And what has happened in Ivy City is that it's a historic residential core, but it is surrounded by, New York Avenue is just a couple blocks away, and there is an industrial area around there. However, the school clearly has always been part of a residential community, and the whole other side of the school is a residential neighborhood. When we found out about that, we started organizing with the residents, and they basically demanded that it be housing and affordable housing, and of course they wanted rental, additionally like affordable rental housing and others, but what we were able to achieve was these types of man-on-Casa habitat homes. And during this period, basically, the city started saying, okay, we're going to revitalize Ivy City. We're going to invest money in Ivy City. In fact, even last year, the city got federal money, federal money, and did a project called the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. They invested in affordable housing, and they did a workforce development report talking about how 50% of people were unemployed and 36% of people don't have a GED or equivalent. And they did a greening project where they showed the picture of the school all renovated with the green space. They showed that. That's their picture. The city created that picture. They said air pollution is a problem. Truck traffic is a problem. We need to green this area. But then behind closed doors, even though the mayor's come into ribbon cuttings for new homeowners moving in, never told these people, you know, marketed and sold houses, the city, to these people, never told them we're planning to park these buses there. Then we come to find out that not only are they planning to put charter buses 65 at a time, so it could be really hundreds over the course of the day, on a historic site, you know, Crummell School, but they've also quietly bought 6 acres of land on the other side of the neighborhood to park all the DPW trucks, all the snow plows, and spent $17 million of taxpayer money, emergency legislation to buy this land, and they also have about 6 acres of school bus parking there. So we filed a lawsuit. I need to speed this up. We filed a lawsuit. They started construction without, you know, following any of the laws. And you know, because we use a community organizing strategy, we usually don't use a legal strategy. However, we were forced to because they were plowing right through. And so in this last week, we just completed testimony in the case of Ivy City versus Mayor Gray and the Union Station Redevelopment Corporation, because these are the charter buses that will be coming from Union Station. And the judge actually took it upon herself to conduct a site visit in Ivy City, which was huge because, you know, even most of the elected officials have come to Ivy City. So on Monday she came, the TV cameras followed her around, we got a lot of good press there, we've had some good stories in the Washington Post. And so we await a verdict December 10th. And I'm hoping to invite you all to a victory party. Of course, this is going to be an ongoing battle, and this is just one site. Like I mentioned, there's over 10 acres of other, but I'm sorry, just one small other little thing. We did start partnering with Dr. Vernon Morris from Howard University, and we installed an air quality monitor. There's 3 permanent monitoring stations in the District of Columbia. They're nowhere near Ivy City. One is in McMillan Reservoir, open space with a reservoir. One is at Haynes Point, near the water, and one is at River Terrace Elementary. That's the one that was put there because of community outcry to the Pepco station. And so the city says, well, we have these monitors and we're within EPA limits and the air is fine. Of course, just within the study period that Dr. Morris was able to evaluate, which we put the monitor across the street from Carmel School, the existing levels of the particulate matter, which I'm not a scientist, I don't know as much, but I think it was PM 25. So he was 225? Okay. Anyway, he identified that the levels right now are at 70% of the EPA limit, and that they often spike above the EPA limit on a daily basis. And this was in October. This was not during the heat of the summer, and this is without the charter buses being there. Again, I hope we can give you an invitation to a victory party if you're interested in getting updates from us. Sign up. Also, my card is there. Thank you so much.
That was great. We could take one quick comment or a question.
Question. So what was the suit specifically in terms of asking the judge to weigh in?
It was based on 3 primary statutes. The first being the law that requires the city to go to the advisory neighborhood commission prior to taking certain types of actions, which they did not do. Then allow the ANC, which is the local neighborhood government in DC, to give input and have their input considered with what's called great weight. They didn't do that. And then also there was no environmental impact study, which would be required not only by the local law, but also by federal law because it's a nationally designated historic site. So those were the primary things. We also threw in there some kind of breach of contract stuff because basically every city planning document says we're going to restore Carmel, we're going to green Ivy City, and of course they sold homes to people based on this. This is something that probably will have to be pursued later by the individual homeowners potentially.
Yeah, I just have one question. I'm just kind of puzzled. The only thing that you were interested in revitalizing was just the school, not the community at large?
No, I mean, like I mentioned, we worked for 2 years just around the housing issue and came up with our whole campaign was revitalization without displacement. So
right.
We talked about everything. Unfortunately, the community has been assaulted so much that we've been forced to continuously work in opposition to things like, during the same time period, trying to put medical marijuana sites in there, cultivation centers, a liquor distillery. Right now, they're trying to shut down some of the bus routes, the metro bus routes to Ivy City. So it's just like an ongoing assault, on the neighborhood. But Carmel has been, like I said, such an important and special place to the community that that's sort of the public space that all of the community activities.
Yeah, but it just seems to me that they're going to be surrounded by industrial business, because I have a community that I'm engaged in, and we have a similar situation. That's the reason why I'm asking the question. But the idea in Baltimore City, we're trying to revitalize the entire area, not just focus on that one. We have historical landmarks as well, but we're looking to expand the entire community, not just one specific landmark.
Yeah. Like I mentioned.
And we're surrounded by the CNX railroad tracks and the public housing and all that too. But I just kind of puzzled as to why you eventually settled on just that one building when you
mean in terms of the lawsuit? Or
well, no. I'm not even talking about the lawsuit.
I have to
Okay.
jump in.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
This is a great conversation,
Okay.
and I
All right.
encourage you to keep it up. We'll have some time, hopefully, at the end.
Oh, no, that's all right. That's all right. I mean, her lawsuit.
All right, our next speaker is Emil.
Amir
Amir.
Sakura. All right. Let's see. Where is this? Not that. Okay. All right, there we go. Thank you. Only 500 presentations there. Now, hello everybody. My name is Amir Sakura, and I actually teach here at the School of Public Health. And before I start, I just want to commend all the previous speakers for doing such a wonderful job. This has been a really good learning experience for me. So please join me in So I am going to talk to you just about traffic-related air pollution. Okay, so what I will be talking about is what we call mobile sources. And I just want to start with this and sort of like this American love affair with cars. Americans love to drive, right? Who wouldn't want to go on that yellow convertible? Right? So if you look at the trend in sort of vehicle miles traveled starting in the 1950, you see continuous increase in vehicle miles traveled that is in trillions of miles. That has been continuing to increase and has sort of like plateaued related, probably related to the 2008 recession, so to speak. So this is trillions of miles, and I was trying to think about how much that is. I don't know about you, but I sort of like don't know how to count once the zeros get past 6 digits. Right? So I couldn't come up with any good analogy. But what we worry about that, and that's all dandy. But the one thing that we worry about that is what is coming out from those vehicles, right? That are traveling that trillions of miles. And things that you probably have heard a lot about, such as particulate matter, carbon monoxide, and so forth. But there are also, other pollutants, such as volatile organic compounds. As the name suggests, these are things that are volatile and that stay in the air for a long time. And that includes chemicals such as benzene and 1,3-butadiene. And both of these chemicals are known human carcinogens, classified as a known human carcinogen by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, National Toxicological Program, as well as the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization. But then it also has things such as another class of compounds called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAH, commonly referred to as, and that includes members such as benzoyl pyrite. It's one of the nastiest carcinogens known to us, and it's the same carcinogen that is actually present in tobacco smoke. So why we worry about this? Because we have situations like that. This is a row home, that you see in many of the inner city environments. So you have huge, traffic, people commuting, passing through those roadways, and just mind you that steps to that home opens to the living area. I mean, that's the main living room on most of these neighborhoods, right? So you have people living very close proximity to the source itself. So traffic here is what we call the source of all these chemicals, all these pollutants, what I'm talking about. So it's very important to note that in many of these inner city environments, a lot of people socialize on the front stage. Okay, that's where people hang out. You come after work, that's where you meet your neighbors, you ask them how they are doing, so on and so forth. Grandmas are hanging there, their kids are playing right there. So that's where a lot of the community socialization happens. So that is a concern because, just 3, 4 feet, 5 feet from that is you have humongous source of traffic that's emitting all these chemicals. I just want you to think that, that when you're talking about traffic pollution, the distance is very, very, very critical. And I'll come to that a little bit later. So we have actually measured number of vehicles that pass through roadways. For example, this is a study that we did about almost 10 years ago, and this was done in the 895 tunnel, that toll booth. So we measured, I think this one is, we're looking at benzene inside and outside the toll booth, and we also measured number of vehicles passing through. So the top slide shows you that, so that's, like there's a peak in the morning rush hour and an afternoon rush hour. And if you look at the benzene concentration down here on this slide, you see the exact similar pattern in the outdoor concentration of benzene. And inside the toll booth, it's a little bit different. And there are reasons for that I'm not going to get into. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's a direct relationship between number of vehicles passing through the road and the concentration of these nasty chemicals that are in the air right outside. Okay, so that's the point that I'm trying to make. And we have also actually measured this chemical exposure among people. So we make them wear these individual badges, and then this is, like the right here on the left-hand side is the exposure of people living in suburbia, and then the middle one is the people living in the urban environment, and then the one on the right is, like we're looking at toll collectors. So obviously there's, relationship between where you live and your level of exposure. And that makes sense because if you look at chemicals such as butadiene, automobile exhaust accounts for the vast majority of it. Okay, almost 60% of the ambient butadiene level is actually coming from vehicle exhaust. So it's not really surprising in that regard. So why we worry about these things? The previous speakers have alluded to many health outcomes, and one of the things that was brought up was asthma. And I think that I don't know if you were there in the morning plenary session, there was also mention of asthma. Okay, so one of my students is actually looking at doing a meta-analysis of all the published studies where we look at studies that have measured traffic exposure based on distance. Okay, so how far these people live from a major roadway. And then there's another set of studies that have measured the number of vehicles, the traffic volume passing in these roads, and see how that translates into emergency room visits. Okay, so this is comparing people, asthmatics who live closer to the roadways to those asthmatics who, people who have asthma but they live further away from the roads. Okay? So when you look at just that asthmatic population, what you see is those asthmatic individuals who live close to roadways have almost, ranging from how you measure the exposure, anywhere from 30 to 70% increase in risk of ER visits. This is not comparing to the normal people, but this is comparing to asthmatics who live further away from the roads. Okay, so you're sort of comparing apple and apple. Okay, you're not comparing asthmatics to non-asthmatics. So this is really important. But this is not the only thing. There are several other health outcomes that are associated with traffic exposure. So Health Effects Institute, which is an organization based in Boston, that's jointly funded by the automobile industry as well as the US EPA to really look at the traffic-related issues and health outcomes. They did a comprehensive evaluation of the scientific evidence as of now, as of actually a couple of years ago. And the conclusion is that there's a very strong evidence for exacerbation of asthma. There's a very strong evidence for asthma incidence among children. Okay, so when you talk about asthma, there are two separate issues. One is if you have asthma, does the exposure make it worse? Another is asthma, so that's asthma exacerbation. Asthma incidence is if you do not have asthma, does the exposure cause you to have asthma? So what what they found was, yes, it was very strongly associated with exacerbation of asthma, as well as incidence of asthma among children, not among elderly, but among children. But they also found, strong evidence for mortality. This is all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. Cardiovascular mortality decreases in lung function, and this decreases in lung function actually is, the evidence for this is coming from the core studies that have been going on in California over the past 20 years. But there's also suggestive incidents about COPD, birth outcomes, and cancers. Okay, so these are the reasons why we worry so much about traffic-related air pollution. And a little while ago, a little earlier on the talk, I mentioned to you about the issue of distance. Okay, why distance is so important. And this slide here shows you the concentration of particulate matter as a function of distance from roadways. Okay, so what you see here on those first two slides is the concentration is very high, close to the roadways. But if you go further away from the road, then the concentration drops down significantly. And this is true for many pollutants. Okay, so when you're looking at like pollutants, the concentration generally drops down to background level after 3 to 500 meters. So if you go 3 to 500 meters away from the roadways, then the concentration is pretty much where the background is for most of the pollutants, okay, generally speaking. So, so this is really important. You know, if you are living closer to the roadways, obviously your exposure is higher. So we actually went ahead and wanted to understand this a little bit further, and we linked the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, the enhanced survey that CDC conducts every year, and they release this data every 2 years. Okay, so it's a survey of 10,000 respondents every year, and that's supposed to be representative of the entire country. So we linked those respondents because we know exactly where they live. So we linked them with the traffic roads, you know, the map of roadways for the entire U.S. So if you look at it, this is what the distribution of those respondents looks like. So a lot of people live close to the roadways, and then, you know, there are more, you know, so there's a range of distance. Okay, so we wanted to dig in a little further. Is how that distance to roadways differ by different subgroups. Okay, because we are interested a little bit at the disparities. So if you look at it, non-Hispanic white live much further from the roadway compared to non-Hispanic blacks or Mexican American. Okay, so the non-Hispanic blacks and the minorities tend to live closer to roadways compared to non-Hispanic white. Okay, this is for the entire country. Okay, this is just not, you know, like one area, but the entire country. If you look at the distance to roadways, and when I say distance, this is a residential proximity. Okay, so how close are their homes to the major roadways? Right. So if you look at it by the income level, you see that individuals who live below poverty level are much closer to roadways, live closer to roadways as opposed to people who are above the poverty level. Okay, so you see like sort of like nice trend here, you know, like much, you know, like many of the people below poverty level live close to roadways. And this is also looking at the volume of traffic on those roads. Okay, so how busy are those roadways? So if you look at it here, so this is an average annual daily traffic, so it's a number of vehicles passing through those roadways. So what we see is, you know, the non-Hispanic whites, that the volume of traffic passing in the roads that they live close to have lower traffic volume compared to non-Hispanic black, Mexican American, and other Hispanics. Okay, so this is sort of national picture, okay, because this is, we are taking the CDC data of close to 30,000, 40,000 people from 1998 to 2008 and linking them with the traffic roadways. Right, so this is important because remember I told you that the exposure to this contaminant depends on how close your home is from the roadways, right? Because if you go beyond 300 meters, beyond 500 meters, the contamination level, or the concentration, drops down to basically to you know, background level. So closer you live to the roadways, higher your exposure is going to. Okay, and this is the data from the same survey I've already published actually, and then this looks at the measure of poor health. Okay, so this is very crude estimate. Okay, so how many people report having poor health? And then this is, you know, so you're looking at the people living closest to the roadways, and the quartile 4 is people who live furthest away from the roadways. So generally, you tend to see higher percentage of people living poor health if you live closer to the roadways, and you know that decreases if you live further away from the roadways. Okay, so I've been instructed that my time is up, and I think that's pretty much the last slide I have. So I, you know, this is sort of just to give you a flavor as to what are the driving factors behind this, you know, like issue of disparities. Why do we care about these things? Because we care because this drives exposure, and we care because this exposure drives how we fare in terms of our health. Okay, so this is just not, you know, like this issue is just not, we're not doing it for just because we're interested in doing it. There is a very valid rationale as to why this is important, and why the work that you are doing is so important, because you are the one that's doing it and going out in the communities and educating people and fighting this on a day-to-day basis. So I commend you on all the important work you're doing and look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
We don't have a lot of time for questions, but let's start with questions for William. Thanks.
Yes.
I have a comment actually just on Amira's research. I'm in the Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities Researchers in the Body Cancer Center at Georgetown University. And in 2010 and 2011, we did a pilot study measuring the indoor air in homes in the southwest, southeast areas of D.C. And at the time, this is really fairly new. I was introduced to Amira at the time. We were looking at proper monitors. We were looking at particulate matter. And at the time, Amir was saying we need to look at more than just particulate matter because of, the components in the exhaust. And actually, he was gracious enough to give me the equipment to do the actual monitoring. And like you said, when we did the analysis, we found not just particulate matter, but high levels of benzene, butadiene, a number of other chemicals. And they're at much higher levels than EPA. And so being a cancer center, our epidemiologists now were going after a very large grant because they have an idea because of Amira's guidance of just how to approach and look, because we are interested areas that we are measuring in are areas that have high breast, prostate, and lung cancer rates in DC. So just commenting on how important, how beneficial research is and how helpful it's been to us.
Thank you, Everett. And that's been really, that was really a wonderful experience from our end to going and visiting the ward and, like going around those neighborhoods with Everett. So thank you for that. Yes?
Are emissions from port operations similar to traffic emissions? Because I'm from Newport News, Virginia, and I work with a care coalition there, and we sit for the state of Virginia, the 3 major ports, and Newport News is one of the 3. And so not only do we have an expressway coming, and now the relationship between proximity and the source, but what about for port operations with ships, trains?
Absolutely. So any, these chemicals that I talked about, as volatile organic compounds, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, anytime you burn carbon-containing material, which is the fuel, whether you burn gas, diesel, coal, whatever, anytime you burn that, those are the product of what we call incomplete combustion. So you're going to have that. So when you have those big ships idling there, they're burning lots and lots of that. So they are actually emitting a lot more than, like your cars or whatever. So yes, the port cities are definitely one of the big issues.
You mentioned that the figures you had were nationally representative. Do you know of any studies that have done something similar locally within the DC metro area?
Not that I'm aware of. So those data is actually, comes from the CDC survey. And what we did is we linked those CDC survey because we knew where those people live and linked with the map of the roads. Basically, that's how we, were able to do that. But is there any, not here in this area? There's a lot of groups, for example, in California, in Vancouver, that are active on this research, and up to some extent in Boston, but not. And I know Hopkins was doing a lot of work on this, but not on this context.
How about taking some group of samples for this particular region and just look at this region within your sample? I don't know how much data you have for this region.
So there are 2 issues with that. One is the survey, National Health and Nutrition Examination, it's a complex multi-state survey. So taken together, it is supposed to be representative of the entire country. They do not go and sample every county in the country. They select, I think, in fact, for this, they select about 15 counties per year. So in 2-year cycle, they have 30 counties. And taken all those counties together, that's supposed to be representative of the country. So if you just focus on Maryland, so that will not be representative of Maryland because they select those specific individuals for certain reason. So we cannot do it just for Maryland. You can't probably do it by the region of the country because it's a cluster sampling. So
Okay, let me just interject here for a second. We are technically at 11:30, which is the end of our session. I'm happy to keep this going if those of you want to stay. I'd like to open it up to all our panelists. So if people want to leave, feel free to do that. But I'd like to, if people want to stay and ask questions, I'm happy to do that.
I just have a brief comment and question, and that is, it seems like people in urban areas drive less than people who are living in other areas, and yet they're exposed to greater vehicular pollution. And do you have anything about the policy implications of that? In other words, what should we do about it?
Well, unfortunately, the drivers are the major contributors to it, right? Absolutely. But there are multiple reasons. So if you were actually measure, those suburban drivers who drive, their exposure would be much higher. But we're not focusing on just the drivers. This was, like some of whom were drivers, others were not. But if you were to just focus on, suburban individuals who drive, commute, their exposure would be much higher than as opposed to somebody actually probably living in an area. But that's not what we were doing. But you have a very valid point.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on that. I'm Hiroi Seki from the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland. And my expertise is transportation planning. And as some presenters indicated, that there is a very high valuation of air pollution emission by vehicle class. And certainly diesel trucks have more emission in regards to PM 2.5 and PM 10. And like some older cars emit the vast majority of pollution compared to a large amount of newer cars. So part of the strategy that we would like to take is to get rid of those older cars. And certainly we'd like to reduce the emission from diesel cars. And so it's a little bit more complicated just comparing urban versus suburban. So we need to take into account the variation of the
okay. The lady in the back?
I guess I'm in the back. I was going to say, but there is a very clear environmental justice issue in terms of we have metropolitan planning organizations which determine how federal funding is spent on transportation within an urban area. And those, because of the way they're set up, are largely controlled by suburban interests that want more highways, that want more opportunities to commute by single occupancy vehicle in and out of the cities. And so that structure of regional government is really contributing to a disproportionate impact on people who live in the inner city, who have much lower carbon footprints, because many of them don't own cars and some are choosing not to own cars. And so when we're deciding to spend money on a highway instead of spending money on a transit system, we're not only directly having a negative impact on lower income and urban people, we're indirectly also having that impact in terms of the air pollution, the water pollution, the reduced opportunities for them to walk safely around the neighborhoods, access healthy foods, etc. So it all ties together.
I just think it's interesting here in the district on behalf of Baltimore, we have a lousy transit system. We're trying to improve it, but we're way behind. But here in DC, where you've got an excellent transit system, you still have so many drivers. And it doesn't seem to have dissuaded people in many respects. So I think there's some real issues about, if you're going to tackle air pollution and your main source is vehicles, obviously public transportation is the best way to do it. But why hasn't it been more successful here in the district?
If I could comment on that, but first let's remember that, Baltimore used to have a wonderful public transportation system. If you go and now driving through Charles Street, the pitch is, the asphalt is filling up, but underneath all those asphalt, there are trash.
There's trash. There still exists.
There still exists. So it is, I think a major contributor to that is the upside down policy that we have, sort of like this very myopic vision that our leaders have. If you think about how much public, how much outcry there is about the metro system over cost of metro system going $2, but then there's I've lived in this area for past 10 years or so, and the entire state of Northern Virginia seems to be constructing roadways every year. So why don't we spend that sort of like resources in improving our public transportation? And a lot of that is, I think, who has the voice, right? This is, the communities that are impacted do not have a voice, unfortunately, compared to the automobile industry, compared to the oil industry. So I think it's very, very unfair advantage, and money talks.
Well, a major disincentive to all of this is that the whole national economy is built around the automobile. I mean, you're dealing with a daunting problem.
Absolutely.
You have only to go back a couple of years when the auto industry was bailed out to know how important that industry is. So there's not going to be a policy, there's not going to be a change in the mode of transportation until there is a way of retooling the whole economy.
Absolutely.
Let's take this lady's question, and then I think we'll wrap up.
It wasn't a question or comment based on her comment about in often majority low-income communities, we find it interesting that they use the statistics in these communities to go and get a lot of these federal dollars, but when they get that money and what they sell the program for that money never comes back to the vision that it's based on. So in Newport News, we call it poverty pimping. And I mean, it's disheartening though, because we feel that, by design you keep areas pocketed in poverty within cities so that you can get the federal dollars that now you have to show you have that in order to get the federal money. But yet once the money comes, all of a sudden it's going to the north. And that becomes an environmental justice rather than injustice.
Well, let's give our panelists the last time. Thank you all for coming.